Greetings world, we are anonymous. A former defense minister has accused world leaders of concealing the presence of aliens. Paul Heller, who was a Canadian minister from 1963 to 1967, is now urging world powers to release what he believes to be hidden data on UFOs. Much of the media won't touch the documents, he said during a keynote speech at their Disclosure Canada tour at the University of Calgary. You just have to keep working away, and hope that someday you get a critical mass, he said, according to a report by CTV.
First is that about in the 1960s sometime there was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously they had thought maybe they were Russian and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, The Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoir, and I named 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta reticuli, R-E-T-I-C-U-L-I, reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the THº systems. So I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers. And I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working. First of all, he was scared out of his skin. But after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality, There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that millennial hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and is a very interesting read. If you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival.
The public will say, in one way or another, Mr. President or Mr. Prime Minister, we want the truth and we want it now because it affects our lives. HΔCKIPG, 91, first went public with his belief in aliens on Earth in 2005, becoming the first high-ranking politician to do so. He claims that the aliens have been visiting our planet for thousands of years, and are unimpressed with how we live. We spend too much time fighting each other, we spend too much money on military expenditures and not enough on feeding the poor and looking after the homeless and sick, he said.
Extraterrestrial life. For ages, humanity has wondered, is there anything else in the cold darkness of space? Skeptics say there is no proof, but there have always been those who dared to dream. And some even claim to have seen things with their own eyes. Do aliens exist? Are they already here? Do they pose a threat or a chance for salvation?
Honorable Paul Hellyer, former Minister of Defense of Canada, and he believes that life forms from space exist and are present on Earth. It's great to have you with us on our show. Why do you say that UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying over our heads?
Well, because I know that they are. They've been, as a matter of fact, they've been visiting our planet for thousands of years. And one of the cases that would interest you most, if you give me 2 or 3 minutes to answer, is during the Cold War, 1961, there were about 50 UFOs in formation flying south from Russia to across Europe. And the Supreme Allied Commander was very concerned and about ready to press the panic button when they turned around and went back over the North Pole. So they decided to do an investigation, and they investigated for 3 years, and they decided that with absolute certainty that 4 different species at least, had been visiting this planet for thousands of years.